Morning guys, Corey here from Sky's the Limit Car Care, and today we're going to talk about paint correction. So what is paint correction? Paint correction is correcting the paint. So what are you correcting it of? Generally speaking, you're correcting it from water spots that have been etched into the paint, swirls that have been something cut into the paint, or maybe some stains of some type of adhesive or something that has soaked into the pores of the paint, and all your contamination methods haven't fully removed all that out. So when we're talking about paint correction, we're usually talking about either compounding or polishing. You could be also getting into sanding, but we're not going to get into that today. So compounding and polishing, these terms are sometimes used interchangeably. Also depends on what country you're in. Some countries will use the word compounding for anything having to do with an abrasive, or they'll call it a compound. In America, generally, when we're talking about compound versus polish, compound is something that we're talking about that's more of an aggressive, the first step, the heavier step of the cut to remove the deeper swirls and the scratches in your paint. And then polishing is usually the second step. Polishing is the step where anything that was left over from the compounding is you come back with the polishing step and you refine it even further. For a deeper dive into the defects that we are polishing and compounding and removing from the paint, just check out the link below, and we've got another video that we did a while back where we really go in depth on what causes the damage that we're going to talk about polishing out today. So if you're new to polishing, if you've never polished before, if you've never compounded before, and you're looking into getting a machine, then there's a lot of machines, pads, polishes out there, and it can be really confusing really quickly. So this video, we're going to try to make that a little bit simpler for you. The first thing you want to establish is what pad and what compound am I going to use on my car, or what pad and what polish am I going to use on my car if it doesn't really need a compound. And sometimes it's not going to be real easy to be able to figure that out if you've never done anything before, if you don't know what you're looking at. But you want to start from the least aggressive to the most aggressive. You don't want to have a car that has barely any damage to it and come in and use a heavy compound on it and cut a bunch of clear coat off of it for no reason, because most of the UV protection that's in your paint is in the upper area of that clear coat. So if you cut through, if you just take a heavy compound and you start mowing through your clear coat for no reason at all, it's detrimental to the lifetime of your of your paint. So the best thing to do is start with a least aggressive polish. Worst case, you don't get all of the damage out, but at least you didn't do something that you can't. It's kind of like cutting your hair. If you cut too much, you can't put it back on. So if you cut a little bit off and you think, yeah, I'd like it a little shorter, then you can always take a little more off. So it's kind of the same concept. Generally speaking, you're going to want to polish in about a 2 foot by 2 foot area. So if you're looking at something like this, then you'd take from a body line there out to about here, and then down, and you can go from there to there. And then depending on the contours of the car and how much space you have up there, then you might switch to a 3-inch polisher, or most guys would probably still just use this as a 5-inch pad, and we'd still just use that same and just let it overhang a little bit over there. One of the most important things that you want to focus on when you're polishing, particularly with a dual action polisher, which is what we're using today. With a rotary, it's a completely different game, but most guys, especially if you're starting out, you should be using a dual action polisher. And with a dual action polisher, one of the most important things you can do is make sure that this pad is continuing to rotate. So with a dual action polisher, it's spinning in this direction, but it's also moving in an elliptical orbit. So it's moving like that. And so it's doing both of those things at the same time. Now that elliptical orbit, it's going to be doing that regardless, but sometimes it doesn't have a forced rotation motor on here. So if you put uneven pressure or too much pressure on this side, then this can stop spinning. And if this stops spinning, then you lose a lot of your cut. So one trick that I've learned from the guy before me, and he learned it from the guy before him, a well-known tip, but if you haven't heard of it, it helps a lot, is take a magic marker and put little marks at 3, 6, 9, and 12 on your backing plate right there. And that way, when you're polishing and this thing's jiggling and it's hard to tell if it's spinning or not, you'd be surprised, but those marks will help you decipher whether or not it's still spinning if you're just starting out and you don't really know what you're looking at. So if that's not really spinning very fast, then you're not really getting much cut. And that's usually because either you have it on 1 and you need to turn it up to 3 or 4 or 5 or something, or it's because you have uneven pressure. You're putting too much pressure on one side, or you're going over a body line, or you're going over an area where that's causing it to have much more pressure, and you need to change where you're distributing the weight on the head of the machine. Or you need to release the pressure that you're pushing on the machine because you're actually pushing down too hard on the entire machine. With a 15 millimeter orbit like this one, you don't need a ton of pressure on there. With a dual action, it's going to do a lot of the work itself, especially with these long throw machines like the 21 or the 15. So my next tip is it's important to clean the pad out after every section. You're going to, after you do one section, a lot of guys will just go in and add some more compound to the pad and start polishing the next section and add more compound and start polishing the next section. And what you have to be aware of is that as you're polishing, you're cutting a layer of clear coat off of the vehicle, so little tiny microscopic pieces of paint are building up inside the cells. There's millions of tiny little cells here in the foam, and that's what's helping the polish to cut through the paint and to achieve the desired effect that you're trying to get to. If you clog that up, then it'll stop cutting. You won't be getting any result. You might as well just stop polishing and stand here and look at the paint because nothing's going to happen anymore once this thing gets clogged up. So the idea behind cleaning the pad is to keep that clean and to be able to keep cutting the same way you were the first time around. So either use a brush like that, an old toothbrush will work, doesn't really matter. Air compressor works really good. That'll work better than a brush. Of course, it blows some dust in the air, and so that's just a matter of comfort and what kind of tools you have available to you. So some people will clean the pad after every section. Some people might go every 2 sections. I would highly recommend doing after every section. It only takes a second, and you'll notice the difference in the amount of cut that you get. One more step that I want to get to that I skipped over is priming the pad. When you first start out, this pad's dry. You can see I've used it before, but this is a completely dry pad. It wasn't used today, and all of that was cleaned out in the past, so that little bit of a stain that you see, that's perfectly normal, but this is a completely dry, clean pad. And if I just put a little bit of polish on here and start polishing with a couple drops of product on it, then it's not really going to be distributed well across the cells of this pad. So the best thing to do is actually add a few dots of polish and then touch it to the paint a few places. Or another method of priming would be to just take a bottle of water or a primer lubricant and just spray just a mist of water on the pad itself, just to help moisten it so it's not dry polishing the vehicle right when it's still dry. Now after you've done that on the very first step or the very first section of that brand new pad, then you don't need to do that again because now it's going to be a little bit damp with product. You're going to go back and clean it out with the brush or your air compressor, and after that you can move on to the next section. You just add a few more dots of polish, and then you do the same thing. One thing that I personally like to do, I mean, everybody has their different preferences. One thing that works well for me is I'll put the 3 dots of polish on there, or if it's a 6-inch pad, then more. And depending on the product, sometimes you use a little more or less. But you put a few, pea-sized drops on there, and then just touch it to the paint. And I do that every section just to kind of spread it out. Just real quick, I'll just tap it across the paint, tap, 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 with the machine still off, and then I'll turn it on and go over that. And we'll get into an actual demonstration of this here in a minute, but I wanted to go through some of these tips first before we do that. So on this car, all paints are different. Some paints are going to require or be better off with a polish like the Scholl Concepts S2 Black. That works terrific on a wide variety of paints, whether it's hard, soft, whatever. This is a compound, or what I call a compound. It's a heavier cut. It also finishes down really, really well. So in many cases, guys won't even have to come back and polish with it because with the latest tech, you don't even always have to refine it. You can finish it down so well that it doesn't make a difference. It all comes down to what your goals are or what your client's goals are if you're detailing somebody else's vehicle, and the paint. And so that's first and foremost. One of the other compounds that we like to use is CARPRO. They've got clear cut and ultra cut. Ultra cut is a little heavier cut than this one and also finishes down really, really well. But these are some of the compounds that work really well for the first step. And then for finishing down, my favorite finishing polish on most paints, I would say, or at least on medium to hard paints, is the CARPRO Reflect. A lot of people love the CARPRO Essence. We get into that in another video you should check out, but that's another fantastic finishing polish. But specific to this particular paint, I haven't polished this vehicle before, but I'm thinking that the S30, the Shoal Concepts S30, will be the best product to do what we want to do to remove any little bits of haze that are left over here. And so that's what we're going to move forward with on this particular paint. If you're new to this and you're not sure what to use, something like Shoal Concepts S30 for light work or S2 Black for heavy work works on a huge variety of paints. So you can't go wrong with that. And you can always check out the email address and the phone number below and give us a call, and our professionals here will be happy to walk you through what might be best for your particular case. But if you're not interested in talking and just want to try something, then those are usually the best go-to. So fresh pad, so I got 4 pea-sized drops there. Each additional section I'll probably use 3. And like I was mentioning, I just tap that across the paint. And then I mentioned earlier about doing like a 2-foot by 2-foot section. That's not a hard and fast rule, but you basically don't want to take on an area any larger than that. And it's just that amount of square footage, like it's 2 square feet. So if you had a 6-inch strip that was, 6 feet long, you could do that too. It's just breaking it up into the way that the body lines are on the vehicle. So when you first start out, you're going to want to start with on a lower speed to kind of spread the product around, and then you're going to turn it up. That's something that you can play with and vary speed to figure out what works best for you, for your paint, and for the machine and pad that you're using. But generally a safe bet is to just start on like 2, 1, 2, spread it real quick, and then you're going to come back and move it up to 3, 4, 5. Generally, you don't need to put it on 6. That's not going to be helpful in a lot of situations. But the more important thing, or equally important thing, I should say, is the arm movement, the speed at which you're moving your arm across the paint. If you just go zipping across it real fast like this, then you're not going to give it any time to get any cut. So generally like 1 inch per second. If you're moving 2 inches per second, you're going way too fast. 1 inch per second, you're getting more in the ballpark of where you want to be. So a couple of things that you'll notice is that when we're polishing, we don't want to just go across up here and then move all the way down there. You want to actually have some overlap. So generally, you'll cover an area of paint that wide, and then when you come back to come down, you'll overlap it by about 50%, and you'll come back again, and you go back and forth until you reach the bottom, and then you change to a vertical pattern like this. Now there's no hard and fast rule, and again you'll overlap by 50% as you're doing your vertical passes. There's no hard and fast rule that you have to go horizontal and you have to go vertical. You could have done it diagonal. I mean, it all depends on the shape of the body panel and 1,000 other things. You might have more defects in this area than over here, so you might slow down over here and spend a little more time here and go over it a little bit more than you did over here. There's a lot of place to vary that, but the main idea is that you're getting consistent coverage. If you have consistent damage across the whole panel, then you want to get that consistent coverage where you're overlapping and making sure you're cutting each area. So the next step after you polish the paint is obviously you don't want to just leave the compound or polish on there. You want to take your towel. Generally, we'll use like a Microfiber Madness Slogger towel, a Microfiber Madness Yellow Fellow. That's probably my favorite towel for wiping off polish, or a CARPRO two-phase towel. And then you just come back and wipe the remaining product off. With a panel wipe, there's a few important things to note. This is CARPRO Eraser. It has two purposes. One is to inspect the paint, which is what we're going to use it for here. And then two is at the end of the, after you've polished the entire vehicle. Of course, it's important to put a product that protects the vehicle back on. And so these products, the polishes and compounds, they don't have any protection in them. So after we're polishing and removing that damage, then we're using the panel wipe to remove the oils, and then we're putting on the protection, the ceramic coating, wax, a sealant, whatever it is. It's going to bond to the paint a lot better if you get the oils from the polish off first. So that's the second use for the CARPRO Eraser. As far as an inspection product, it's not necessary that you use that you use the eraser on the entire car. If you've become confident with your inspection and you know, like, hey, this car looks the same all around it, it's the same paint all around it, I'm getting these results. Now you can kind of, after we do this test here, if we have the results we want, we can follow that same procedure across the car without having to use the CARPRO Eraser all the way around it. But at the end, when we're done, then it will be important to use it all the way around the car for the purposes of allowing that sealant, wax, or coating to bond to the paint properly. So one thing about the CARPRO Eraser or any panel wipe, you don't want to use a dirty towel. You want to use a clean towel. In this case, I just used that one side, so I am actually going to flip that to the other side, which I know is still clean. I would recommend just using two separate towels if we were polishing the whole car. That's what we would be doing. We would be using, we have like orange and blue or yellow and green, however you want to do it. But you have one for your initial wipe of the polish, and you keep that separate from the one that you're using with the eraser. And that keeps things simple for you. So with the eraser, the best thing to do is you don't want to spray it on and then like let some of it dry or anything like that. The thing is, get a few mists on there, and then you want to be the one that's making it come off of the paint. You don't want it to see those lines lighting up right there. You don't just let those evaporate on their own. You want to make sure that you're getting the final wipe on it. And an important thing with any detailing, quick detailers, whatever, is to keep that towel flat. So now that we have all of the oils wiped off using that CARPRO Eraser, now we're just going to use a light to inspect the paint, and we can see what kind of results we got and decide whether or not we're satisfied with it, or if we need to refine it further, change our pad, change our polish, and go from there. So I think that's all we have for today. Hopefully I went over everything and I'm not forgetting anything. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, be sure to leave those below and we'll definitely answer those right away. Really appreciate you guys joining us again. Make sure to subscribe. And yeah, that's it for today. Thanks a lot for watching us and supporting us. Have a great day.